All right, so viewers, we're here again on another episode of World of Hustle Podcast. It's your host, Ryan Evans. I'm very fortunate today to get to talk to Mr. Garrett Anglin of Anglin Law.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you on, Garrett.
Thank you.
The audience, I think, is in for a real treat. We're gonna have a lot of fun today, and we're just gonna talk. We're gonna talk about quite a bit of stuff, but some of the things that I'd really like to cover are your journey as an attorney. Okay.
Okay.
Kind of how you, and within that, for people that are interested in possibly following that profession, like what things that you found maybe later on down the road would have been more helpful in your path to doing that.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned before we started, often I see people that, or I'll see like attorneys on social media or whatever, and people ask them a question, and they'll kind of answer frequently asked questions, that sort of thing. I have a few questions like that I want to ask you later on.
Sure. Yeah.
I also have a story I want to tell you about a time that I had to hire an attorney. I was telling you about hiring John.
Yeah.
And I want to talk to you through that and kind of get your thoughts on that. So anyway, the first thing I want to ask you, Garrett, is what was I going to ask you? That's right. First of all, how long have you been an attorney?
So I have been an attorney going on 5 years now. So I graduated from law school in May of 2017. Yeah. So, and then started practicing shortly thereafter. Now, obviously, there's a whole process for officially getting licensed and everything, but I started probably in August or September of that year. Went down to the office. Me and my father started practicing together, and been doing it ever since. So coming up in like around the August 2022, it'll be about 5 years. So
that's awesome.
Which is surprising because it doesn't feel like it's been that long at all, and I still feel like a babe in the woods. But but it's definitely been that long.
So father-son team. I have to ask about that. Is it a blast working with your dad?
Actually, it has been. I mean, a lot of times, and I'll tell you this. So when I first started doing this, I was introduced to a bunch of attorneys. There were attorneys with big firms, attorneys with small law offices. Like we've got mid-sized firms. I mean, across the board, right? And they would say, "Oh, you're practicing with your dad. Oh man, you like that? Like, are you sure about this?" Like, I was like, "Yeah, no, it's gonna be fine." They're like, "Okay, well, I warned you, all right, and they would always tell me horror stories about them working with their fathers. And so, I think it's different from person to person. I think that some people, have a good, working relationship with their father, if that's, on the table. And then sometimes they just are standoffish and they butt heads and it doesn't work out. Yeah. But I've had a great time. We've had our moments, obviously. Father-son, you have a different dynamic than you would with just a coworker or with just another attorney who's mentoring you.
Right.
Even if they were a father figure, it's just a different relationship when it's your actual dad. So, but we've had a great time. He's, I think our working relationship has actually been sometimes easier than our personal relationship. Like we know how to communicate about law really well. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like we can sit down in the office and be like, let's talk about this case. Let's talk about that, and we just rattle stuff off. So, but he's been a great mentor. He's guided me through a lot of stuff. And I've been happy to be able to work with him. So
that's awesome.
It's been a great opportunity. So
that's awesome. I did a little bit of research and I saw that your dad has been an attorney since like 82 or something.
That's right.
So long time.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have learned a lot from your dad?
So far, yes. But I'll say it's twofold, right? So there's like one side of the coin and then the other. So the one side is that I've learned an immense amount from him. Like he's guided me into cases. He's taught me about numerous areas of law. Being a small law practice like us, small law office in Murfreesboro, we kind of cover anything and everything that comes through. Like if we have a client comes in and they want to do estate work, we do estate work. They want to litigate a personal injury case, we litigate a personal injury case. They want to do, breach of contract or problems with their job, we figured that out. We learned how to do that too. You know, you kind of do whatever your client wants, right? Because that's just kind of what the job entails in a general practice. So he's led me into a lot of different opportunities to learn about all these different areas of law. Now, on the flip side, the other lesson that I've learned is that, you know, mimicking can only go so far. So one of the big lessons, and you learn this throughout life, but in my career has been a big lesson, is to learn how to do things my own way.
Yeah.
Because when you first start practicing, just like with any job that entails a lot of responsibility, you go into it being like, okay, well, how does this person do it? I'll just do it that way, you know, and that'll work. And that works to an extent, you know, when you first, you know, your first couple of cases or whatever you're working on, the first couple of times you're like, okay, you just do it this one way. But then as you go through it, you kind of got to develop your own mode of handling the job you're doing, because you do it every day. So you got to find a way to make it your own, and so that you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, that
so you're
makes
comfortable
sense.
Going into it every single day and being like, all right, I know how to handle this client, and develop your own relationship and way of talking to other attorneys. And so that's also been a lesson, is taking the stuff that he's handed me, the lessons that he's taught me, and some of that knowledge that he's passed down, and then incorporate it into my own, you know, style.
Yeah.
So, which it's been fun to do, but it's, you know, it's a time, you know, time eating endeavor to kind of figure out how you want to do things. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you said you do a lot of wide variety of areas, and I want to ask, is there like a area that you enjoy the most?
So right now, I wouldn't say that there's an area that I enjoy the most. I like the idea of the general practice. I like the idea that at any given moment, you know, you could take on a case that switches directions for you. So I think there's a lot of times, and I don't want to, you know, get off on too much of a tangent, but like there's a lot of, you know, in the business of law, there's a lot of pressure, I think, amongst attorneys to sort of specialize, especially if you go and work for a bigger law firm. There's a lot of, you know, a lot to be said for people that, like, we only do contracts, we only do transactional stuff, or we only do this type of litigation. You know, we're a healthcare fraud law firm or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's fine if you want to go that route, and, you know, they want you want experts in the legal field, just like anything. But for us, we like the idea of being able to at any given moment switch directions. Yeah. But right now, a lot of the stuff we've been handling has been real estate, transactional stuff. We've done a lot of breach of contract disputes with regard to real estate, and I've really enjoyed that, and doing a lot of the estate work that comes along with that as well has been. I've really enjoyed getting to know those clients and doing that type of work. So yeah, it's been good.
That's awesome, man. So it sounds like in your world, it's always something new. Like, it's not going to be like it's don't get me wrong, I know it's similar because it's the same area maybe, but you're meeting new clients, and it's not like I don't think it doesn't sound mundane to me. Does it?
I don't feel that way. I mean, I think it depends on the personality, but like for me, like, I love that aspect of things. It's like coming in and feeling like at any given point, you know, somebody's going to call up with a type of case that you've just never done before. Yeah. And you got to go and research it and figure out what the legal standards are, and figure out if there are any statutes out there, if the court has ruled on these issues before, and you know, if you like law, then that's interesting to you, right? Yeah. You know, for some people, we're like, it just sounds like falling asleep to me, but like, you know, you know, that's fun for me to go out and kind of figure that out, and then put together sort of a plan of action, right? And that's sort of the exciting part, is you get to call up the client after you've done your research and say, look, we think we got a plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this. This is our steps. You know, if this works, then it stops there. You know, if they comply, if they respond to our letter, or if they, you know, do what they're supposed to do, then that's it. Yeah. Otherwise, we're going to file this, and we got these different ways that we can win this case. And that becomes the strategy part, which is fun. So,
yeah, it does sound fun. I could see the comment you're making about people that would fall asleep, but it'd be fun. It would be fun to me, I think.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing is that like it's two-sided. You know what I mean? Because like it starts out with a lot of research, a lot of reading cases that most people find really boring.
Yeah.
And then once you like, especially with litigation, which is the thing that I really enjoy doing with our office, is litigating cases. You file a lawsuit and you have a controversy between two parties about some issue.
Yeah.
And it starts out, of course, there's a lot of background work you got to do, a lot of reading you got to do, and to figure out what the grounds for your case are. Yeah. But then once you file it, then you got another party that comes in, you got attorneys that start calling and screaming at you, and you get all these arguments, and you go into depositions, and people just say the most ridiculous stuff in depositions for I don't know why, but like I think people get nervous, and some people get nervous and they won't say anything. Some people get nervous and you couldn't get them to stop talking if you tried. You're like, stop, please stop. You're just taking your whole case right now. You're like, they'll admit to everything. They're like a singing canary, and so that gets fun. You have all this stuff going on. And that's when stuff gets exciting, the interactions with people and the way you have to do it. So that stuff is a great time for me. So.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So another question I have for you. What originally inspired you to become an attorney? I mean, I know your dad did it, but was there anything outside of that?
I would say that it started out definitely with my father. I think that he had a big role to play in it. Being around an attorney, he always had that atmosphere around him, of his law practice, and I found that to be interesting. Like, oh, what are they doing? Like, what are they doing? What's he doing every day with these attorneys? And they're all, because attorneys are just like anybody. They get into groups and they're just like, let's talk about stuff that nobody else knows. You know what I mean? Like, and so I always found that intriguing, obviously off the jump, but. As I was growing up, I did debate while I was in high school and found that to be interesting for me. And, I was always, just sort of interested in the sort of argumentative dynamic that comes along with litigation. So from the get-go, I think I was always interested in doing something that involved litigating. Like I wanted to sort of have somebody on the other side and the sort of art of trying to outwit them or out strategize them or, out, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a mini game of war or whatever, like you're just trying to outdo them. And like, and the thing is like, it's sometimes it's like a very personal victory, even though like you're working for your client, you also get this very personal victory. Like, got him. Like he thought he had me, but I just swooped out and like had this move, and that's the idea, is that like you get to do a career where like that's a big part of your everyday, is like kind of trying to play this game with the other side using these rules and statutes that you have at your disposal, right? So
that sounds like a blast, man. Do you watch movies that like basically the stars of an attorney, like for instance Lincoln Lawyer? Have you seen that movie?
I have not seen The Lincoln Lawyer. I've seen a few. I haven't seen Lincoln Lawyer. I've seen a few of the one, like, The Firm back in the 90s with Tom Cruise. Did you ever see that?
With is it Jack Nicholson in it?
I don't remember if Jack Nicholson was in it. It's the one where Tom Cruise, I think it was Tom Cruise, he gets hired as some firm. It's those John Grisham movies would always be like, oh, this guy goes and works for a firm and the firm turns out to be evil. You know what I mean? Like all the firms were bad in the John Grisham books for some reason. But no, I saw some of the older movies, but I can't remember the last legal movie I saw. I don't know. Well, I don't remember what The Lincoln Lawyer is about, though.
The Lincoln Lawyer, it's got Matthew McConaughey as a star, and he ends up in this case where. Wait, I don't want to ruin it for you.
I would probably watch, but I mean, you can explain the movie. I mean, you can do
that. Okay. So there's this guy, and basically, like, he purposefully gets Matthew McConaughey to be his attorney because he's committed a crime on a case that is related to another case that Matthew McConaughey worked on. And so once he becomes his client, it's all based on that whole attorney-client privilege thing, where he basically tells Matthew McConaughey, he's like, he admits, I did the crime that you're it's a heinous murder. And he says, I did the crime, but he basically knows, like, you can't tell anybody because it's attorney-client privilege sort of thing. And so Matthew McConaughey's, like, kind of in a trap, and he has to find a way to still nail this guy without violating that, I get, is sort of the premise.
That sounds...
It's pretty interesting.
It does actually sound interesting, which is like in all... was the Lincoln Lawyer, was that based on a John Grisham book as well?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, obviously, you're a big reader. Like, all attorneys are big readers, aren't they?
Yeah, well, yeah, sort of. But like, I read a lot of stuff that's very nonfiction. You know, I read court cases and statutes all day. You know what I mean? So, I haven't read like a lot of books. I just sat down and like opened a book. My fiance, on the other hand, now she goes through books. She's an attorney as well, and she reads books like it's like going out like all the books are going to be destroyed tomorrow. Like she, you know what I mean? She'll like wake up and just be like. And like 2 days later, she'll be like, I finished that one. I got to go pick up another one. I'm like, when are you finding time to read all these books? Like, I feel like I come home and I'm tired. I'm ready to go to bed. She's just like, got to read this another book. Yeah. So, I haven't read any like fiction books, like some novels in a while. But definitely read a lot of cases. But no, but I was going to say real quick is that premise is kind of interesting. And I've known attorneys who have not necessarily been in that specific predicament, because the attorney-client privilege has its boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just this thing where it's like, oh, attorney-client privilege. Well, that means that, you know, this attorney there's nothing he can do now. He's trapped in this situation. There's always something that could be done. You know what I mean? Like, if somebody admits to you that they've committed a crime, you know, it changes the dynamic of how you litigate your case, of how you handle the proceedings. You might even have to, like, I've had attorneys say that they've had to file motions under seal to the court to request that they be removed from the case because they know that at some point on the line they think their client may perjure themselves or lie under oath. Yeah. Because if they admit to that, but they're like, well, I'm never going to admit it to somebody else, that means eventually you're going to lie to somebody. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But now you bring that up, I'm going to have to go watch that.
You got to watch it, man. I think you'll like it.
Yeah.
There was another one with Tom Cruise where it is Jack Nicholson. I can't remember. It's something about the military. He's like a phenomenal attorney.
Oh, yeah. A Few Good Men.
That's what it is.
Yeah, you can't handle the truth. That's right, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. That's so good.
That was a good one. That was a good one. That wasn't like, that was classic. That was a classic.
So, have you ever... Obviously, I know those things are like dramaed up. Mm-hmm. But is there, as far as your experience, is there any like, how realistic is some of the stuff that we see in movies?
I can't think of any like specific like example off the top of my head that's like, oh, this is ridiculous. But like, for example, a lot of people, you know, in law school would joke about watching the show Suits and be like, oh yeah, nothing like what practicing law is like at all. Like, you know, he just like, I feel like I want to say like the premise of the show Suits was like he actually goes and practices law with a law firm but never passed the bar or something like that, or passed the bar but never went to law school or something like that. Yeah. And it's like, there was, whatever they described his situation as, it was like, you could not have done that. You could not have done what he did in real life. Like, they would have vetted him before they ever let him just walk onto their company property and start practicing law, right? Yeah. So, like, stuff like that. I would say that there's a lot of stuff that's very, very unrealistic. When I've watched shows about... I've had a lot of bench trials, but I actually haven't had a jury trial. But, like, the rules of evidence are the same, and what you can question people about and how you can handle witnesses is all the same. Mm-hmm. When they have these shows and they talk about, like, it shows them questioning a witness or something, me and my fiance will sit there, like, watching the show being like, no, they can't do that. Nope, they can't do that. Wow. He should be objecting right there because he can't do that either. Like, you know, like they'll be out there just telling these crazy stories, and it's like, you can't say stuff like that in your, you know, in your opening statement or whatever. So there's a lot of shows there's a lot of shows that are very unrealistic, and I always tell clients when they come in, most of the time they don't rely on the show and say, well, I saw on this show that you can do such and such, but they will like reference it as if like that gave them a basis for like understanding how the proceedings go. And I'm like, just forget that. Don't mention that again, because that is not real. That is fake. That is fiction. Okay. It is much less exciting than that. But yes, the shows are not very realistic at all. So
got you. Man, that's good. So back to, again, like I said, one of the things I wanted to get captured in here was anybody that's interested in becoming an attorney one day. I just want to kind of walk through briefly, how does that progression work? I mean, obviously you have to go to school and all that. And I've always heard like it's hard, very difficult.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of walk me through what?
Yeah. So I'll walk you just briefly through my background, which was, I graduated from UCLA in 2014.
Quick question real quick.
Yeah.
A little trivia. Do you know who has the most men's college basketball championships?
Is it UCLA? Fantastic.
Did you already know
that? I probably did, but
okay.
I didn't keep up with sports all that much, so I just knew UCLA was very successful in the sports world, so I just assumed that was probably it.
Yeah.
Did you say basketball, right?
Yeah, basketball. I just learned that this March Madness just got done, and I learned that I think they're number one with championships.
Really?
Yeah, they were been damn good at basketball, obviously.
They have. Well, they had the who's it called, the John Wooten, the Wizard of Westwood.
Okay.
Remember? Did you ever know about him? He was just a coach of UCLA back in the day, like decades ago, and he was very, very successful. Gotcha. But honestly, it should have been them this year.
They played UNC.
Nobody wanted to see Kansas there. Not to get off topic for the legal thing, but nobody wanted to see Kansas there except for people in Kansas. That's about it.
No, I did not want to see Kansas. And they have like 5, I think, level 1 violations against them. So they've got some trouble coming, I think.
Yeah.
But sorry.
As they said, no, it's fine. I wanted to say that. I just wanted to make that known.
Yeah.
That was the most anticlimactic way for that to go down. I was like, come on, Kansas.
I know.
Of all the teams, like, could have been UNC, but it had to be Kansas. But anyways, so I graduated from UCLA in 2014. And the process for becoming an attorney is, I would say it's rigorous, but it's not convoluted. There's not a bunch of steps that you have to go through. Like, you can, if you're going to go to law school, there isn't any major in college that you specifically have to get. Like, a lot of people will be like, oh, I do political science, or this and that, but there really isn't any one major that you have to choose to proceed on to law school. And law schools don't look at your major to determine whether or not you'll be a successful law school candidate.
Gotcha.
They sort of look at when you graduate from law school, when you graduate from your undergraduate education, you have to take the LSAT, which is the law school admissions test. And depending on the outcome of that, that's a huge determining factor. There's always a lot of critiques about standardized testing being a determiner for getting into schools, but law schools still very much rely on LSAT test scores to determine whether you get in or not.
Yeah.
So that's usually a big thing. So if you do really well, if you whatever major you pick in, so I always tell people, if you're going to go to law school, pick a major that you like, that you're really interested in. If you already know that you're going to proceed with that route, then do something you really like.
Yeah.
I studied philosophy. At the time, people were like, why are you doing that? I said, I'm going to law school. I already know I'm going to law school. I'm going to, read stuff that I want to read about. You know what I mean? I'm not going to study econ.
Yeah.
I will never use econ. Have not ever thought about that. Like, I've never been like, man, if I only had that econ major though, like, it would have changed everything. So you pick the major that you want. You take the LSAT. If you do really well in that, you can, go to a good law school. Law school's 3 years. Law school is very rigorous. I will say that I did not perform to the best of my ability in law school. It was an environment. It's a specific type of environment that requires kind of a daily commitment. In fact, I almost wish that I could have gone back, and been the age that I am now, or the maturity level that I am now, and done law school.
Gotcha.
Because you have that sort of, once you develop that mentality of working every day and having that sort of consistency to devote yourself to the time of studying and doing all this work, because it's not easy to, it's really just the commitment. Like a lot of times, like the work itself isn't the hardest, you know. Now succeeding just because you do a lot of hard work isn't everything, but that's what people always told me, and now that's what I always tell people. I'm like, take it from me, a lot of it is, if you decide you want to be a lawyer, you get into law school, wherever you decide to go, it's time commitment. And I think my fiance would agree. Ashley did really well in law school, and she always says that she performed well not because she was the smartest person in the class, but because she put in the time. And that's just what it is. I know that's kind of cliche, because like in everything people say it's about that, but in law school it's so true. It's like, to be successful, you just got to put in the time. And then, so if you do well in law school, they have, a lot of law schools have great career orienting departments to direct you in the direction that you want to go. Now, obviously, if you're going to go work for a small law firm and basically generate your own business, then you're on your own. You don't have much help in that. You just got to go out and try to convince people that you're worthwhile of their time, and that's it. But, you know, like, for example, when I graduated from UCLA, I went to Tulane down in New Orleans. Tulane had a great department to help people sort of fit in where they wanted to be. There are people who wanted to do maritime law, which is, you know, the law of the sea. They have firms that do that. Like down in New Orleans, funnily enough, that's actually stuff that comes up a lot because it's a huge port. Right? Makes sense, So you wouldn't think about that in Nashville, where there's like literally no water anywhere. You're like, really? People have cases about ships, right? It's like, yes, they do actually. So, so then if you go through that process, put in the time, then inevitably you can apply to these firms, and they will vet people. They will vet people to determine if you've got a good grade point average in law school. They'll bring you on. They'll bring them, like, from the first year, your first summer year of the 3 years that you're in law school. They'll have people come on as summer associates at all these different firms and see if they're good fits. So then by the time you graduate, if you've done well, you already have like a job lined up to go work with a law firm and get experience in the legal field and see if that's what you want to do. And a lot of attorneys that I've known start out with a law firm doing litigation, or they start out doing certain transactional work, corporate stuff. And they decide kind of at that point, do I like this? Do I want to switch gears and try something else? Once you've had some time to work for a while, then you kind of get your bearings and decide what kind of law you really want to pursue. So for me, it didn't go that way. But I was lucky enough to have the opportunity when I graduated to go and work with my father. And so he gave me a lot of casework off the jump as well. Kind of introduced me to clients. Was like, all right, here's your start. And, you know, got going from there. The other thing, obviously, is before you start practicing, you have to pass the bar, which is the most miserable experience that you'll ever have studying for, because it is, it's a very short test, considering the amount of information they test on. I mean, obviously, it's a multi-hour, multi-day test. But you have to cram so much information, and they have these great courses that you can take that try to like shove all this information that you've taken over 3 years into, you know, everything memorized, you know, but it's still very difficult, and you have multi-week, you know, sort of studying for it and losing sleep and all that. But then once you pass the bar, it's great. And if you get your license, if you get your license to practice, it's like a lightsaber. You know, you feel like you can do anything with it. Suddenly you can file cases on your own. You can walk into a courtroom and just argue on someone's behalf, you know, whereas otherwise you really couldn't do that. So, but anyways, that's sort of the process. And I was just trying to kind of summarize that it's not complicated, but like the process to get there just requires a lot of time commitment and focus. So I always tell people who are thinking about going to law school, the number one thing that I think that I would tell people is, if you're thinking about it, if you want to be an attorney, if you have any distraction, if there's something on your mind that you feel like is keeping you from really fully committing that time to law school and getting to the practice of law, then go out and do that first. And then come back to this once you've kind of gotten that out of your system.
Gotcha.
Because if you go into law school with distractions and you got stuff on your mind and you're worried about other things, then you won't be focused and you won't perform as well as you could.
That makes sense.
So, and I do think it's important because a lot of people didn't have the sort of the opportunity that I did to go practice with my dad, to like sort of have that introduction to clients without having a job lined up. Yeah. So when you're going through law school, it's really important to like try to work hard and get a good job lined up so that you can get experience and also, pay the bills.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks for that, Garrett.
Yeah, of course.
That was very informative. I want to ask 2 questions on that. On the LSAT, is that exam, like, in your experience, was it very hard? Is it like a lot of self-prep? Is that what it is?
So they have a lot of courses now.
Okay.
Back when my dad took it, back in the 80s, before either of us existed, they did not have that. So there was a lot of self-prep. You had to go, you went and bought these books, and you just basically just sat there and just tried to read the books and process them as much as you can. Nowadays, they have these courses that you can take that are actually fantastic, that are state-specific. Any bar exam is state-specific. So every state has similar laws, but they are all different. They have their own code for each state as to what those laws are. So you have to learn what those are. And be able to answer questions about them. And the courses really focus on going through what shows up on the bar exam. So now it's been around long enough to where these courses can go back and see all the different bar exams that have come before and said, this type of question shows up this number of percentage of times. So they can say, like, without a doubt, this type of question is going to be on the exam. So know this area of law. Gotcha. Like, you know what I mean? Like, know estate stuff, because they always ask about estate stuff. Yeah. There's other, like, secured transactions. They'll be like, that never shows up. So don't worry about it too much. Yeah. Read over it, but don't worry about it too much, because it shows up like 0.03% of the time or something like that. So that's the reason why the courses are so helpful, is because they really give you an idea of how to adjust your priority levels to know what you need to do. Yeah. Because the exam itself is 2 days long. It is really intense because you're there for like a long period of time. It's not like you go and take an exam for 1 hour. Yeah. You're there for multiple hours, and you have to constantly be on, because there's kind of a time crunch a little bit. Yeah. Not too bad, but you can't just sit there just dreaming away. You know what I mean? You got to move, and it's a multiple choice section as well, which is difficult because you're either right or you're wrong. You know what I mean? It's not a gray area. So you really have to sit there and be like ready to know the answers to these things. So, but yeah, it's a difficult exam, but it's definitely one of those things where when you pass it, there's no feeling like graduating from law school was cool, but then passing the bar was like, nailed it. I got this. That felt more like, celebratory. Like, I think everybody felt that way. Like, every attorney who's passed the bar was like, that was the crowning achievement. I'll never do anything better than passing the bar. So
that's awesome. So on that LSAT, like, it sounds like when you walk out of that thing, you're probably just exhausted.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's 2 days of like, and I remember after the first day, you're exhausted. Like, you go home that afternoon/night, like, just wiped. And the thing is you have a whole second day of doing that all over again. And you're like, there's no way. It's not going to happen. There's no way. And you got to, like, there is really, like, going up to it. It's like you're planning to run a marathon. Like, you got to, like, change your eating habits and, like, hydrate better and, like, change your sleep schedule so that you, like, know that you can have enough energy to get through this sort of, like, very long period of time of testing. It's tough. I mean, I build it up like it's this, like, huge, like, insurmountable thing. I mean, a lot of people do it, but I think everybody that takes that test is like, that was rough. That was tough.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. So
another question on that. You mentioned going back to the bar. So let's say theoretically today, and there's no way this would happen, I know, but let's say that someone didn't go to law school. Can you sit for the bar if you haven't gone to law school?
In Tennessee, I don't think that you can. I think that there are some states, like in California, they have like funnily enough, I think Kim Kardashian is doing this. They have like a baby bar that you can take, and if you pass that, then it like lays the groundwork for you to be able to sort of like work with a lawyer mentor who then guides you towards taking the official bar with California. And that's sort of like an alternative route to actually taking, just going to law school and doing the sort of normal conventional steps towards taking the bar. In most states, the requirement is that you have a JD.
Gotcha.
So, which requires that you actually complete a law school course. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to go to the full 3 years. Some people go to law programs that are accelerated, and so they get done in 2 or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you have a JD?
Yeah.
Is that Juris Doctorate?
Juris Doctorate, yeah.
Juris Doctorate, okay.
Yeah, and that's when so you get that when you graduate from law school.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's the same thing as like, when you get your Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science from your undergrad, the degree that you get at the end of law school is your JD.
Gotcha.
So it's tough, but it's not like, with like being a doctor, I was going to say, like when you go through the process of becoming a medical doctor, like it's not only difficult in a time commitment, but it's like long and drawn out.
Yeah.
It's not like a simple, like, okay, you just do this thing. Like you have to go through many years of it's tough to get into med school, and then it's, tough to get through med school, and then it's tough in your residency. You know what I mean? It's like they very much like weed through people. Whereas like with law school, I feel like, you will succeed or fail just based on how you are within the career, like whether you like it or not. It's not impossible to get to the point of practicing law, but it definitely will determine whether you want to do it once you're doing it. Because it's like you either like it or you don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, gotcha. One of the reasons I asked that question, I'm a big movie guy. I
kind of noticed that.
You gotta pick that up, huh?
Yeah. You've seen The Lincoln Lawyer like 13 times.
Too many times.
Just
man.
Yesterday, actually. Right? Yeah.
It's so good. You have to watch it.
Tell me
what you think.
I will. I'll get back to you on that.
But there's a movie with I think it's Leonardo DiCaprio. It's called Catch Me If You Can. And it's based on a real guy.
Seen it? Yeah.
You seen it?
That's a good one. Now that one I have seen. That was Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks, yeah.
Yeah.
He played the FBI agent, I think, or whatever. But I feel like in that movie, Leonardo DiCaprio like studies for the bar. Like that's one of his people that he's if I remember correctly, he's like pretending to be all these different people, right?
Yeah.
He's a fraudulent guy.
That's right.
And
that's right.
He ends up somehow like in some state. I don't know. He passed it. I don't know what happened.
I do remember that. I think that was like I don't remember what the circumstances were, so I can't speak to whether that was like possible or not at that point in time, because I don't know at what point it was like, oh, you have to have a JD to like pass the bar or anything. Like I never looked into that, because like when in my mind it was like in the present time when I was trying to get my license, I was just like, what do I have to do?
Yeah, that
was all I was concerned with. But yeah, I do remember that scene where he was like supposed to be this like really smart guy too. Like he was obviously like he was doing counterfeits and ripping people off, but like obviously he couldn't have done half the stuff he did without he had IQ through the roof or something. Yeah.
I mean, the FBI, I think they offered for him to come and work for them because he was
That's
so
right.
good.
What was his name? I remember his name. It was based on a real guy.
Yeah.
I can't remember what his name was.
Was it Frank something?
Frank, yes.
It wasn't Abernathy, was it?
It was Frank Abernathy. Yes, it was.
Okay.
You just acting like you didn't know.
No, I really.
You watched that earlier today, didn't you? To prepare for this podcast. It was like I was watching Lincoln Lawyer and Catch Me If You Can earlier, and I just happened to come up. No, yeah, Frank Abernathy. That's right.
Yeah.
I thought he did work with Did he not work with? I thought he did work with the FBI for a little while.
I thought they like cut his time if he agreed to work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he agreed to
catch
do
other
work.
counterfeiters.
That's correct. That's right. That's right.
Great movie. Okay. Well, like I said, these things tend to go by fast. I don't think we've been at it for an hour, but we've been talking for like I think it's about 40 minutes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
This has been good stuff so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I want to ask you a couple questions, Garrett.
Okay. I may or may not know the answer, so we'll see how it goes.
So there was a guy. He came and it's not important. I was talking. He was a guy that came out and did some work here for us, and he and I were just shooting the shit. And he said he was doing some work for an attorney, and he went to go. It was like I had to sign off on what he was doing, the work that he did here for his company.
Okay.
Right. And I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't always read those agreements, dude. I'll just sign them sometimes.
Yeah.
Frequently.
Yeah. That happens a lot.
Yeah. And he said that he went and tried to get an attorney to sign it. He's doing work for an attorney, and the guy says, the guy's sitting there reading it forever, and he's like, man, it just says this and this and that. And the guy's like, I'm an attorney. I read everything. Do you read all those agreements that you know?
Man.
What do you recommend for people?
Sometimes it depends on like the gravity of what's happening around me. Like if I'm signing a contract with some guy who's going to replace my bushes,
yeah.
Like if he screws up the bushes, I'm not gonna sue him about the bush. Like it's just not gonna happen. Like I'll be like, I'm gonna pay you. Just get off my lawn. You know what I mean? Like, but if it's somebody who's going to repair my car, do work on an engine or do work on my house or my roof, absolutely reading those contracts. Now, don't get me wrong. I hate the attorneys who are like, I'm an attorney. I read everything. Get out of my face. Like, I don't say that, but I'm just like, just give me a second. I'd like to just check this. Because, like, there's always stuff in contract. I'll tell you why, too. Because half the time, you have contractors or people that, run their own businesses, home inspectors, people that do work on houses, people that do work on cars, auto dealers, all that stuff. A lot of these small businesses, they have their own contracts. They did not get reviewed by an attorney before they started handing them out to sign. Yeah. So they don't even probably, really know why certain stuff is in there. Yeah. Sometimes they do, but like a lot of times I think that it's gobbledygook. Mm-hmm. Like we get contracts, they're like, yeah, I signed this contract with this guy. And I'm like, who prepared it? And they're like, yeah, he did. And I'm like, where did he get, like, did he get this Rocket Lawyer? Like he signed up for a subscription and just got like this thing that just pops out when you answer a few questions. So that's why I read it, because like I'm always concerned that there's going to be stuff in there that is ridiculous or they don't understand that it's not really enforceable. Yeah. And I'm just checking for stuff like that, because I see it all the time. I mean, people come in and they're like, how is this gonna affect me, or like what are the ramifications of this contract if I don't do this and this and that? Yeah. And a lot of times I'm sitting there trying to explain to them like why this doesn't make sense, or like these two things are contradictory. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, I do try to read those contracts. I try to keep I try to stay a little grounded about which ones I'm going to make a big deal out of and which ones aren't a big deal. On that note, though, I will say this. So me and my fiance are getting married in October.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we have been dealing with a lot of marriage planning, right? So we've been trying to get together with caterers and vendors and, DJ, all that stuff, putting down payments on a lot of different things. Well, during the height of the pandemic, a lot of weddings were getting canceled. And at that time, the vendors and the caterers and all these people, they hadn't really factored in that these things would be canceled. So they had contracts that these, bride and grooms were signing that really locked them in. Like, if you don't do this by this date, you're locked in. You have to pay this amount of money. Mm-hmm. And we actually had a lot of contracts that came in at that time where they were like, this surely has to be some sort of legal out here for something that was totally out of our control. Yeah. And honestly, in some cases there was, some cases there's not, depending on the circumstance. But I don't want to really get into the nuts and bolts of that. But that became like an overarching concern for us. So with that stuff, we would get contracts and we were like, okay, what's the ramifications here? Do we have something that we can make sure we can move this? Can we get our deposit back? Like, we don't want later on down the line to have to be, getting into a fight about, something because we had to cancel and it wasn't our fault. So in those situations, we definitely try to read those contracts. But that's also because we already have money on the line too. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Whereas like if I don't have anything invested in it at the time, I sign agreements with Apple all the time, and I have never read those contracts. they're like 500 pages long. Who knows what I've who I've sold my soul to? I don't know.
Yeah. So on those, man, I sign them all the time, and every time I'm like, I should be reading this, but just like you said, they're 500 pages.
Yeah.
And I can't understand them anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's like it's definitely sort of a well-trodden landscape where people are talking about the enforceability of contracts that are not reviewed. It is, like those things that just pop up. Like you're just like, oh yeah, you make this purchase and you sign off on this agreement,
Yeah.
It's kind of a gray area, but the one thing that I always tell people, because people come in all the time that have issues with contracts, and they're like, well, I didn't know what I was signing. I just didn't know. I didn't know what it said. And I'm like, well, you signed it. And the biggest thing about any contract is that, if you sign something, you're binding yourself to it.
Yeah.
Now, the difference with that, if like you bind yourself regarding the purchase of a house or something, then it's assumed that you know kind of what the sort of parameters of that agreement are, right? All the terms in that contract, even if some of them are unexpected, if you didn't review it, something that you wouldn't think would be in there, it's all going to have to do with the purchase of this house. It's all going to have to do with this one thing. Yeah. What people are worried about with like blindly clicking agree on random agreements with big companies on websites and stuff like that is that they're going to be obligating themselves to things that are unrealistic. Like, let's be honest, like if I'm, going to buy some headphones and I sign some agreement, there's really not much they can contractually obligate me to through my purchase of some headphones, right? Because there's no consideration there. There's no meeting of the minds, right?
Right.
So that's the thing. Like you'd have to have two parties that really understood what they were getting themselves involved with.
Yeah.
So you can't just haphazardly, put your signature on something and become obligated. But in situations where like you knew what was going on, you knew the circumstances, but you signed it without reviewing it, then that's kind of like your own fault. You see what I'm saying? So there's a slight difference there.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I sign those things all the time. If anybody came back to me and was like, "Oh yeah, you told them that you'd give them your social security number if they ever asked," I'd be like, "No, I'm good." It's gonna be a hard pass for me.
Yeah, one of the things I kind of worry about with that though is like it's been a recent thing in the news is the whole thing around security and everything. Like if I'm signing and they're saying something in the fine print that says we are going to be collecting this data on you, that sort of thing. That kind of worries me sometimes.
And I think that's like, so privacy is definitely becoming a newer thing in the courts. I don't think that it's been like, and when I say that, I mean that with a lot of issues, like with real estate, there has been case law that goes back to the Civil War. You know what I mean? It's just been around for a long time. Things have been decided. With privacy, it's sort of a newer topic, a newer thing, especially with the distribution of data, sensitive information. Again, I think a lot of that comes back to a meeting of the minds. I think that comes back to whether or not there was, two parties who, reciprocally agreed to something. You know what I mean? So it's like if I go and put in my contact information for shipping or something like that, or to, put in my credit card to buy something, and I click some agreement saying, yeah, we may sell this information later, that cannot possibly be fair to the party who is, just putting that information in to purchase something, right? Because the transaction doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? So I don't think that, I haven't read too much, case law on what courts have said about these issues recently, so I can't speak to that. But like in my opinion, just based on my knowledge of contracts and stuff like that, I don't think that could be enforceable. So
gotcha.
I don't lose sleep too much over it. So
that makes me feel a lot better. So thanks for that insight.
Yeah.
one more thing while we're talking about contracts. I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've heard that when it comes to writing contracts, so for me, for instance, at times I've like had little friend things where like, oh, write a contract for us, we'll sign it and agree on that. I've heard that like if there was ever a dispute over it, if there's like ambiguity in the contract, they will rule against the one that wrote it.
That's right. Okay. That's right. Now, that is a presumption though. Like I want to be clear because you were talking about like, oh yeah, me and a friend like do a contract with one another. Yeah. Like that's going to be a little bit different of a situation than, you know, what the courts are talking about. Like, because usually what you're talking about is like the person that drafted the contract had the power to input the terms, knew exactly what those terms meant when they were writing it, and then had the other party sign it. So it's interpreted against the drafter because the drafter had the advantage, the legal advantage in determining what this contract meant. Yeah. So if like, you know, I've been in that situation in cases before. For example, we had one case that we actually just recently, well, I say recently, like a few months ago, won an appeal on at the Tennessee Court of Appeals where it's a professor at Nashville State who went into the administration and had a certain salary, and she had a contractual arrangement with the president of the college that if she ever decided to go back to teaching, go back to faculty, that she would have that she would get a certain percentage of her salary in administration when she went back, right? And this wasn't specifically laid out in the contract, but they, like her and the president of the college at the time, sat down, went through it, discussed it. They discussed, here's what our policy is, here's what's going to happen if you transfer back to faculty, right? So then come time to transfer back to faculty, she makes a decision. She says, I'm done with administration. I've put in a few years doing this, and I'm ready to go back and, you know, teach chemistry again. And she goes and says, I want to transfer back. And the organization that oversees all the colleges, which is the Tennessee Board of Regents, they come out and they're like, oh yeah, no, we're not gonna approve that. You have to set your salary in this range of salaries. It can't be this high. And she said, well, that was what was agreed upon. This is what this provision in this contract says. And that was a specific situation where, you know, I believe the courts kind of look at that provision and they say, it's unclear, so you have to determine what the right interpretation is. If there's competing interpretations, then the person who did not draft the contract, being the employee, kind of gets that benefit of the doubt because they have less power, they have less advantage over the terms. Gotcha. You see what I mean? Yeah. So in that situation, yeah, I think you're going to get that legal precedent playing a much bigger role. When you have two parties who are similar, you know, have similar knowledge of the business that they're undertaking or the contractual arrangement that they're undertaking, then I don't know that principle would apply as much. Yeah. Because if like y'all are both like, yeah, here's what we're gonna do. We'll do da 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 da, and then one of y'all's like, here, I'll grab the pen and write it. Like he's not gonna be like, man, I'm about to get screwed if we have to litigate this contract because I'm the one writing it right now. Like, I don't think it's gonna be like that. You know what I mean? So.
Oh man. Well, again, thank you for that. That was insightful, very insightful. Okay, I had some more questions for you, and I think we're almost at an hour. So to respect your time, I'm going to ask some questions and work on wrapping this up.
Okay, that sounds good.
So what's the best one here? I want to ask you a little bit about. I want to ask you a little bit about the legal system in general. Okay. Yeah. The way I understand it, and I just briefly kind of looked at this before we talked, just to see what I found on Google. There's like common law. There's like you tell me. There's common law, and then there's another type of system, and there's different around the world. There's like different systems that the legal system is based on, right? Or different
Yes.
set of ideas?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is actually interesting. So when I went to Tulane, Louisiana is actually one of the only states that still functions on Napoleonic Code, which is a specific French form of law that has its own set of rules that date back many, many years, right? Centuries, right? And that's a specific thing, and it has its own system rooted in it, and Louisiana follows that rooted system, which goes back a long way. Every other state in the United States uses common law, right? Which is an English form of law that rooted back centuries, where it's sort of like what they call the common law, which is like a sort of approach. It's a rationale, it's a paradigm for approaching all these different legal issues. And it's been around forever. And a lot of that has been solidified through each state's like laws, their legislation. And a lot of times through the courts when they set certain precedents through their decisions. And those decisions usually will say, oh yeah, the common law approach to this was such and such. And that goes back to decisions that were made, before the U.S. even became the U.S. And then sort of a certain logic to a lot of legal issues was already apparent. And they just sort of drew from that to determine what the rationale would be for this situation, this situation, this situation. So,
Gotcha.
So in the United States, I really can't speak to international law. I did a little bit of studying that in law school, but it is a lot more of a gray area, because when it comes to international law, obviously you have international treaties, you have sort of international agreements as to how things should go, but you don't have like a rooted system so much so as you just have a smattering of different bodies of law that are sort of being conglomerated to form a general idea of how things should be, that all the countries agree on. But each country, specifically the United States, has just a long history of its own decisions and its own processes, and it just so happens that it roots in the common law. And that's all that is. It's just sort of like a long-standing, traditional understanding of how law is approached.
Gotcha.
So
if I get in trouble in China, can I call you?
No.
You can't help me.
I can't. If you get in trouble in Mississippi, I can't help you.
Gotcha.
That's one thing that a lot of people don't know, because if you like I said, everything's state specific. So when you pass the bar in Tennessee, you pass the bar proving that you understand Tennessee law enough to practice law in that state, at least for 5 years. Most states, after you've practiced law for 5 years, have reciprocity, meaning that you can apply to get licensed in that state without having to retake the bar in that state.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's that's nice. Which I'm coming up on that 5-year mark, so that means I might be out of town. I might just leave and go somewhere else, like I would have anywhere to go. But like, that's an interesting thing, because like people are always like, well, you're a lawyer, can't you just come up here and like help do this? And I'm like, no, I can't walk into a courtroom and do anything other than here in Tennessee, at least for right now.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. They got the reciprocity and not having to redo that.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the process is, but there's still like a process you have to go through, but you at least don't have to go back and retake another state's bar, which would be, like I said earlier, horrific. So I just wouldn't want to go through that. I'd rather just stay here. But like with that process, you can at least have the opportunity, if you needed to move or you wanted to relocate. For example, hypothetically, my fiance's family lives up in Ohio, in Cincinnati. We've never considered actually moving, but like, what if that came up? She had a job opportunity up in Ohio.
Yeah.
That would give us the opportunity to be able to relocate a lot easier than it would be if we had to go and restudy for a bar and take it. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. When they give you your license, it's not firm specific, it's individual specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Gotcha.
Oh yeah. The firm, any company doesn't have the right to practice law. The attorney that works for that company has the right to practice law.
Gotcha.
So a company, a firm, which is essentially just like a corporation, or an LLC or a professional limited liability company, whatever.
Yeah.
That merely is just a way to conglomerate all those attorneys into a business format for them to, share in the profits of that company. But like that company does not have any right to file any legal document, to go before the court, to make any statement before the court, or represent that the company's not licensed to practice law in any way.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, another question here. Actually, let me get into this story
Okay.
really quick, and I'll try to make it brief.
Is this your story?
This is my story.
about John?
Yeah, when I hate to say this, I got in trouble. I was like 19 years old, Garrett.
We all did at that time, so that's all right.
And you're probably gonna think this is a little silly. A lot of people, when I tell it, they think it's silly.
Okay. Hit me with it.
So I was 19, and I had been like throwing little parties at my house, having folks over, and long story short, some kid that was a friend of a friend's little brother. I'm sorry, my friend's friend, his little brother's friend, shows up to my house. I've never seen this guy in my life.
6 degrees of separation right there.
Yes, it's a load, man. Never seen this kid in my life. And all of a sudden, I hear somebody knocking on my back door, and open the door. It's 2 police officers, and he's standing here. They're standing here with this kid. They got him in handcuffs, and they're like, "Are you or do you live here?" I was like, "Yes, I live here. What's going on?" They're like, "We're gonna need you to come with us because he's 17 years old. We walked up. He has a beer in his hand." And I'm like, I've never seen him before. And so anyway, they ended up arresting me. They gave me 2 charges. One was contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The other was underage possession of alcohol.
Okay.
So fortunately, thank God, I had hired John, and when I went to his office, he sat down. He opens up this big ass book and he shows me this code, and he's like, "Look, this charge right here where they charged me with underage possession." He's like, "They can't charge you with that because in the state of Tennessee, it's actually legal. I guess it's related to certain religious practices. If you're on private property to possess alcohol, you just can't do it in public." I think is what John explained to me. And so I was like, "Dude, thank God." Because I feel like that if I hadn't had him there, they might have still charged me with that. And he said, I talked to the officer, and he said he talked to the magistrate, I guess, and the magistrate told him that he could charge me with that. I don't know, but I ended up getting that dropped. And anyway, on the other charge, the kid was like, he was so remorseful. He ended up calling me the next day. Called me a couple times, like, "I'm so sorry, man. I know you don't know me, but he said I just walked up with so-and-so, and I know you're getting in trouble." He went to juvenile that night. He's like, "I know you're getting in trouble for this." He's like, if we need to like go to court and me tell them that you don't know me, I just walked up by myself with beer in my hand, I'll totally do that. And so I told John that, and he was like, "Yeah." So I tell you what, in that case, there was a list of, there was like, probably 12 people outside that saw it. He was like, give me a list of those guys' names. We ended up talking about it, and we were trying to expedite this. And John was like, "Look," he's like, "Look, honestly, we could probably go to trial with this and beat it, but you've never been in trouble before. You're never going to be in trouble again." I've never been in trouble again, thank God. He's like, "Let's just go pretrial diversion to get this behind you." And that's the
smartest thing to do. Yeah. Easiest thing to do.
Easiest thing to do.
It's like your free get out of jail free card. It's like the one skip. You know what I mean? Like that's what everybody. Because people always think it's gonna like show up later. It doesn't. Like that's what the diversion is for. It's like if you've never been in trouble before, you go in, and if it's like for a misdemeanor, then they'll put you on a pretrial diversion. You come back a year later, and they dismiss it. Yeah, they hold it. The judge holds the decision for a year, and you have to like make sure you behave and do all the things, don't get in trouble with the law. It's like kind of being on like a mini probation, much milder probation, and then you come back You're done. They never have to hear of it again.
Yeah.
But it is interesting the charge that they had. I'm surprised they would have worried about charging you at all. You know what I mean? Like once they heard the facts of the situation.
I'm not sure what happened. And the thing I wanted to ask you was this. So since then, I've had multiple friends and family that have been on like jury trials for DUI specifically, and
tough cases.
Yeah. When the short of it is, the ones that I've seen, they've gotten like hung up, or the trial just keeps going on and on because the jury cannot agree for whatever reason.
Interesting.
And so when I heard that, I was like, man, to me, I don't know if they're supposed to. It's been my grandmother told me this story. I don't know if you're supposed to tell me about this or not, but she told me about this story about the DUI, and I was like, man, if that guy if he was able to keep from getting convicted after the story he just told me, he should have been convicted. I would have convicted him. I would have said this guy is guilty.
Yeah.
I was like, I think I could have gotten my case dismissed. You know.
I think that. Let me tell you this about jury trials. I haven't had very many, but I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
And I've known a lot of attorneys that have done it. I've seen a lot of trials. I have been around juries before. I just haven't gotten around yet to trying my own in front of a jury. And I know this. The jury is hit or miss because they are just the guys down the street. And a lot of times they don't know the law, and there's no guarantee that they will understand what's being presented to them. Yeah. So like if there's, a lot of times attorneys, they look at things and they see technicalities. Well, in the state of Tennessee, there's this requirement, this requirement, this requirement. Well, a lot of times, and this is just my opinion because I haven't specifically gone before a jury and presented my own case to see how they reacted, but I've seen a lot of great attorneys present great arguments, and you get the feeling like the jury's listening and kind of seeing just how they feel about it. Do I feel like this guy did something wrong? Because if that's the case and everybody's on the same page, then they'll find a way to punish that person for something. You know what I mean? Try to make, maybe, cut it in half. Get rid of one charge, but hit them with the other one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Don't hit them with the worst charge, but get them with the medium charge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just to try to, and then if they look at it and they see, oh, this guy just seems like he's really put together. It's his first time getting in trouble, But none of those things are relevant to whether or not you're guilty of the crime that's before them, right? So
right.
You're talking about these determinations that juries are probably weighing as being like, yeah, this is something we should be talking about, Yeah. There's no relevance in the law as to whether you were actually guilty of this crime.
Yeah.
Like, obviously there are certain situations under the rules of evidence that allow prior criminal acts to come in, right? If they have to do with dishonesty or something like that to disprove your credibility, right? Yeah. But for the most part, the fact that you have committed a crime before does not weigh into whether you committed this crime, right? You have to prove beyond and criminal cases. I'm not talking about the civil cases that we do. Yeah. I did criminal stuff for a little while when I first started, and I had to get away from it because I had a lot of trouble with the DAs and with the way that they handle stuff. And like the story you were telling, in a case like that, in any rational setting, that's something that should have been dismissed. You shouldn't have had to sacrifice a pretrial diversion, like your get out of jail free card, for something that they should have just been like, look, we'll just dismiss this. Yeah. This wasn't his fault. He didn't intend this. Like, we're just not going to do that. No. They'll fight tooth and nail to get some sort of conviction out of it. Yeah. To get some sort of, like, we want somebody saying I'm guilty at some point on the line, right? Yeah. That's what their job is, I guess. Yeah. But I honestly think their job should be to determine whether the case has merit. If it doesn't have merit, get rid of it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, it's a shot in the dark with a jury. And, it's also really tough working with DAs. They'll go out of their way to try to get a conviction for no reason on something that they probably don't need to expend the time and resources to do. Yeah. So in response to your question, you might have beaten it if you had that jury. But you could have gotten another jury that was really conservative and said, this guy was throwing parties? He's drinking? Oh, yeah. He should serve some time. Gotcha. It's like, it's a misdemeanor. You can't serve time. Don't care. Put him in jail. Put him in jail. So you just never know. You never know. Because because your attorney, right? Mm-hmm. If you're going to have a jury, your attorney gets to do voir dire, which means they get to go and question the jury and try to pick out who's the best people they want on that jury. Both sides get to do it. And they kind of have a number of, eliminations that they can say, I don't want this person on my jury. Mm-hmm. And they try the best to mold the jury to be the most advantageous for them to get the best outcome. Gotcha. Even then, you're trying to read people. You're trying to say, based on just a limited number of questions, mm-hmm. whether or not they're going to rule in favor of your client. Mm-hmm. And you don't know. So that's why it's a real tough bag. And you can be the most convincing person in the world, your attorney could be, mm-hmm. and you don't know how a jury's going to feel about the facts that are put before them. So that's the reason why, and I'll say this, because I don't want to go off too much on it, but that's the reason why in all the cases that I've worked on, and we've worked on cases with, worth a lot of money with big companies. We've worked on smaller cases, just like little personal injury actions between individuals. Mm-hmm. And I've never seen one yet get to an actual jury trial in my experience because it's such a crapshoot. There's so much uncertainty about that on both sides that usually something gives. The other shoe drops. Somebody gives way and says, all right, let's do something. Let's not. I don't want 12 randos sitting up there deciding whether or not this is what the deal is between us. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there are so many other ways to try to resolve cases these days other than impaneling a jury that usually people exhaust all these options. Mediation, negotiations, all this stuff. I mean, there's just so many ways to get it done. Yeah. I mean, that was a little bit of a tangent, but as I was going to say is with criminal stuff, I had to get away from that too because it was such a crapshoot. You'd have so many situations where you're like, we shouldn't even be doing this. Yeah. There's situations just like yours where you have, good, upstanding people that are going to be very successful in the future who just had a bad night, made a mistake, not a big deal. Yeah. Something that they should be like, oh, okay, slap on the wrist, don't come back or do some community service. You know what I mean? Yeah. And they'll be like, yeah, we're going to bind it over circuit court. We'll have a trial if we have to. And it's like, just come on. So that's what I was going to say is if you have that pretrial diversion, take it when you can. You just never know. You never know what you're going to get out of the criminal justice system for sure. So, yeah.
All right, man. We've been here for a long time. One more question. What was I going to ask you? Okay. I just want to ask you just in general really quick, Garrett, before we get out of here.
Sure.
First of all, I want to say this has been awesome. I've had a blast, dude. It's been so
Thank
fun.
you for having me. Yeah. I was a little bit nervous. Thank you for having me. I mean, I was a little bit nervous when I first walked in. I was like, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. But once we got going, it's been fun to kind of talk about this. I've never gotten the chance to really discuss it too much before outside of just doing it. So thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to do this.
As I said, thank you. Okay, so I had a professor one time. I took one business law class.
Yeah.
And he was an attorney, and he said, I remember him saying, he said, if you're gonna break the law, he said, break one law at a time. He said he had a client one time. He's doing 110 down the highway. He's cooking meth in the back seat. Like,
great advice.
You got to make a choice. Which law you want to break? I just want to know what general tips do you have for people, just in terms of I don't know, just general legal advice.
General legal advice.
What do you see people mess up a lot that's silly they could do, and they could save themselves heartache? One of the things I know, going back to contracts, right?
Yeah.
I think some people try to maybe cut corners sometimes. Mm-hmm. In the companies I've worked for, man, it's both the last two bosses I've had are CFO, or have been CFOs, and like I feel like those guys are constantly looking at some sort of contract, and I feel like that at times if it's really more than they feel like they can handle,
yeah,
they shoot it off to the attorneys and let them kind of digest it.
Yeah.
I guess that's a good one. What would be your advice around maybe just how when is it time to send that off to the attorney or get an attorney involved?
That's what I was gonna say, is that like the advice that I always give, and like I know this is maybe self-aggrandizing because I am an attorney, and so I'm sort of encouraging people to come to me and give me business and opportunity to represent them. But at the same time, I think it's really true that the most important thing is to know when to let control of the reins and not be thinking that, you know, you have all the answers and that you can make decisions and get away with it and there won't be repercussions, because I do find that a lot of people wait too long. Mm-hmm. And by the time, you know, it's kind of like, it's like, oddly enough, it's kind of like when people wait too long to go to the doctor and it gets, you know, the situation gets a little bit too rough, and then they're like, oh, now we got to get lawyers involved. And I'm like, yeah, but if you'd got lawyers involved on the front end, we wouldn't even be here talking about this. You know what I mean? If you had somebody that was able to negotiate that contract, or, you know, send out a letter and negotiate a resolution to this issue that you had, rather than calling them up and yelling at them and telling them this and that. And as a lot of times it's about, you know, especially if it comes to issues between individuals or companies or something like that, cooler heads prevail. And a lot of times issues get irritated by the two parties trying to, you know, butt heads with one another until things have blown up and spiraled out of control enough to where now we're paying attorneys to get involved. Yeah. And it's like, usually, you know, a lot of people think that like, oh, okay, if I go and hire an attorney, it's going to be so much money. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you this, when we have people come in, we spend a lot of time consulting for free. I have done a lot of research for free. I will always talk to people that call on the phone with a question like, hey, is this something? Like, do I have a case here? Or is this something that I need a lawyer for? Yeah. Always happy to discuss that with people without charging. I don't do that. And I think for smaller law offices, they won't, because our goal really is to aid people to understand how to resolve an issue, how to resolve a thing, you know. And if that thing doesn't require us, we're going to tell you like, hey, we don't need to be involved here. Yeah. But it's always a good idea to try to get in touch with somebody and say, do I need to have an attorney involved? And I always tell people when they call on the front end, even if it's not an issue that they need an attorney, I'm like, you did the right thing by just checking and seeing what your options are. Yeah. Because that way, you know, before you dive into it and try to handle it yourself. Yeah. Especially if you have people pressuring you to sign paperwork, and like, you know, like all those situations with like those home builders and it was like home developers who would come in and get in touch with like elderly individuals and try to convince them to sign contracts to purchase their house for really, really low prices. Yeah. And it's kind of like taking advantage of somebody who's vulnerable. You know what I mean? And it's not just like being elderly or being young. It's just like if you don't have any sort of knowledge of what you're dealing with, and somebody's saying, hey, just sign it. It's a good deal. Promise you. Yeah. It's like, just call somebody up and say, hey, maybe just take a look at this for me. You know, it's worth paying a couple $100 to not have that headache later on down the line. So that's my advice, is kind of knowing when to let go and, you know, just consult with somebody and see what you think the options are.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's extremely insightful, extremely helpful. I want to take a moment to say on that note, this podcast is targeted at, as I told you before, entrepreneurs. It's about careers, it's business, tech, everything, right? And so I suspect there's probably a lot of people out there that are entrepreneurs that watch this. And I want to take a moment. This book right here is one of my favorite books. It's The Millionaire Mind by Dr. Thomas Stanley. And one of the things that he says is so critical for the people that have been successful is to understand that you need an attorney, right? Yeah. You got to have them. And so there it is, documented what you just said. Yep. Talk to somebody.
Yes. And I think that is that is very true. I wouldn't say that like that's the number one thing that you need to like, but it's definitely in like the top 5, top 10. Like, you know, not necessarily me per se, although, you know, I'm in town, but like, you know, just having somebody that is trained in a field that has so many pitfalls for people and ends up costing people so much money on the back end because they weren't careful.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know attorneys get a bad rep for, you know, trying to, you know, get money out of people when they're vulnerable, when they have a bad situation going on. But I think that that's really not true. I think a lot of the attorneys I know don't go out and try to find people who are vulnerable and try to get them to pay them money. They try to resolve people's issues as quickly as possible for the most part.
Yeah.
The attorneys that I've known and that I've respected so far in my career have been very straightforward, and they take situations and just like, okay, what do we need to do to get this done as quickly as possible? You know, as seamlessly as possible. So yeah, I think he's right. I mean, just trying to have somebody that knows their way around that field, always the best thing for you.
Yeah. Well, I'll sign off by saying, particularly if you're a business owner, it's not a matter of if you're going to need an attorney, it's when.
That's right. That is absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Well, man, it's been great. Like you said, if anybody does need an attorney, got a great one right here, particularly in Murfreesboro, Rutherford County.
That's right. Happy to be here.
So,
yes, and thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate you, Garrett.
Thank you.